Hey, I'm Morgan, and this is the PS We Expire podcast. I am so excited to share this episode with you today. I met Elizabeth very briefly at the start of a presentation that she was doing on end of life planning, and I knew that I had to have her on the podcast. We did have some technical difficulties, so if you're watching the video of this, there's going to be a chunk of it that's just a black screen. But I was able to piece together our conversation and be able to have such a fulfilling conversation with Elizabeth about what it means to create a life that we love, and really what it means to face our own mortality with courage and use it as a way to inform the life that we have now. So I hope that you enjoy this episode of the PS We Expire podcast.
I took a one-way flight to India. I told my parents I was going to volunteer with the Sisters of Charity, Mother Teresa's group, which I did. And that was what got me to India. That's what got them to agree to allow me to travel that far away on the other side of the globe. And so I volunteered at a couple of different locations, some physical spaces that were supported by the Sisters of Charity, one being Premdan and another one being Kaligat. And these were basically really basic hospices for, I was working on the women's side of things, for women who had been found dying on train platforms or, on the street somewhere and didn't have the social safety net or familial safety net to care for them. And so in my work, I would arrive every day at 8:00 and I would go around and I would clean the beds and I would wash the floors and I would bring food to people who could eat. And through that, I befriended a woman named Dorothy, who was also in her 20s and was dying of tuberculosis. And when I look back, right, I probably shouldn't have actually been working with a patient with tuberculosis, but it was such that, the care was needed. And so every day I would go and I would sit bedside with Dorothy and I would hold her hand. And it was one of those phenomenal human exchanges where I did not speak Hindi and she spoke no English. And yet there was something really important about both of us companioning one another in those spaces. And I remember when I would leave and the sisters would say, the minute you walk in that front door, Dorothy's eyes light up, that you are this taproot to this place of safety and something really essential for her in this dying process. And that experience taught me, or experientially exposed me to the sense of, we oftentimes think it's not my business to step forward and be with somebody as they're dying. Who am I to step into the death space? And at 21, I was gifted this experience of knowing, our business is that we're humans and that we need one another in these really fundamental ways. And for whatever reason, right time, right place, coming together of all of these different, variables, I got to be the person who was bedside with Dorothy as she died from tuberculosis. And it wasn't what I did. It wasn't what I obviously said. It was how I was probably in a lot of ways unskillfully there, but also knew enough to say it matters how I come alongside of and just companion this person. And that made so much difference.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think the recognition of the language barrier actually can be a relief to many people who don't engage in that type of companionship with people, because they're like, well, what am I going to say? And like right out of the gate, you've given us this wonderful story of the language not being necessary to be able to be with someone as they're transitioning. So I am really curious though, like, when you said that people often feel like, who am I to get into the space with people, or it can feel like an intrusion. And I will take it a step back from actively dying into someone who, maybe has like a terminal diagnosis or a potentially terminal diagnosis. How do you offer
yourself to be with people in those circumstances without feeling like you're intruding?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'll even take a step back from that and say, so one of our teachers, Dr. Alan Kelleher, who's in Australia and has worked a bit in the United States, talks about the fact that death and dying are social events with medical components. They're not medical events that have these secondary or tertiary social, kind of components to it. The death and dying and grief and illness are fundamentally social at the core. And research shows that, typically over 80% of our needs in those spaces are psychosocial in nature. And so I just highlight that to say that's our business, right? That we are relational beings, and that so many people have such an unfortunate and heartbreaking experience of feeling apart from and isolated and disenfranchised from the wider world when that scary terminal or serious illness diagnosis lands, because we all sort of look at that and say, oh, now they're in a different category of living or dying, and it's more medical than not, and I don't have any expertise, right? I don't know how to talk about the diagnosis. I don't know what to say that will actually make this feel better to them. I don't know how to change the trajectory of what's going to happen for this individual or this family. And, so there's been this really interesting sort of disruptive disempowerment piece that's come around illness and dying, because we regard it as this medical event. And so I think that's the first interesting thing to situate ourselves within, or a different framework to walk in the front door with, is that this is social, it's relational, it's spiritual. Those are the spaces where we're really needing one another. And then, that pause to say, well, how do I do this in a way that's not going to interrupt or be not what people want? It's interesting. It's almost like somebody gets the illness and we somehow take this whole agency away from them, right? As if because they're ill, all the moments, all the experiences, all the challenges, all the joys, all of the awards, all of that's led up to that moment is sort of erased. And it's sort of like, oh yeah, we just have to get in there and do the things. I always remind people, we have our faculties there, even if we are challenged by, something physically scary physically. And so to ask, to remember to center the other person's experience and really say, I'm confused. I don't know what to do here, but I just want you to know that I am here. Or I am actually feeling a level of kind of, overwhelm or not knowing. But I want you to know I'm here for it. And when and how you can tell me what you need, I will do my best to respond to that. Right. Or you may not know today, but I want you to know that I will continue to be here and check in and see how I can come alongside of you, because I don't have all the answers as a supporter. And I'm sure you don't have all the answers as the ill one or the griever, but I know that we'll do this together in the way that we can. And so it's coming from that place of humility, and also the recognition that, we don't even dip our toe in the waters because we think, oh, I don't have it all figured out. It's like you dip your toe in the water and you say, I'm a little bit scared and overwhelmed, but I trust that we'll be able to do this together, right? Let's just keep asking the questions to see what's needed.
That's beautiful. The shift that you spoke about right off the bat, as it being a social event with medical parts to it, medical components, is a really important framework shift that I hope that people will also come away from this conversation being like, oh, I see, I'm looking at this differently now. Because really it does feel like in our culture, we're so separate from the death process with humans, with animals, with nature. We're so separate from it. We keep it at such an arm's length that when that happens with people that we love, especially, it's like, well, now I turn you over to the medical establishment to like deal with this thing, instead of seeing how it's actually like such a communal thing to walk through this together. So that's really beautiful. And I really like that you said, when you were working in India, that every day you would show up and you would bring food and wash floors, because I think people underestimate the power of just the daily living components that, you know, when someone is diagnosed with an illness, none of those things go away. Like the laundry still needs to be folded and the food still needs to be reheated and all of those things happen. And so that's a really beautiful way to be alongside someone as they're facing this illness, to be able to, you know, offload some of these things or just show up in those ways. That's really lovely.
Research also shows that typically when, you know, an individual or a family, when they're navigating a serious or terminal illness, we assume, right, it's 24/7 support with hospice, that it's very, you know, a medical experience. And research shows that typically less than 5% of a person's time is spent face-to-face with a medical provider in those windows. So we assume it's a medical event, and then also we're like, oh, and they're taken care of, right? Things are tended. But the reality is there's 95% of somebody's day or week or month where the needs truly are more, you know, social, relational, psychosocial in nature. And so, yeah, getting in there and helping to clean out the fridge or winter the garden or take the dog for a walk. I mean, all of those are things that essentially need to continue to be given love and attention. And I think that's the thing too. I say to people, like, we don't all have the same role to play, right? We don't all have to be a high level trained end of life doula or a palliative care doc or the person who's sort of conducting the whole thing. You could step in and play a really essential role by being the one that picks up the phone and calls people and gives them updates as to what's happening, right? That we all, what are those, you know, when I had one of my teachers kind of talk about it in terms of the archetypal framework, what is that archetype that we kind of naturally feel inclined or moved towards, right? Like I'm the girl with the clipboard that can organize things easily. I'm the one who likes to storytell and get people in the room. You know, I'm the lover of food, and I like making sure people's bellies are, you know, taken care of during this window. So, you know, what are those things that you feel sort of stirring within you that are your more inherent human superpower to allow you to show up? And we're not all going to have the same thing that's going to bring us into the room.
Yeah, the conversation about social connection has probably never been more important because of what we're seeing with record high numbers of loneliness and social isolation. And obviously some of this is a result of just what happened through COVID. But with the conversation around death and dying and grief, it's a subset that has been even further pushed to the margins of what is visible in our society, because we are just so largely uncomfortable with the death process, and even with grief on a broader scale that isn't just about losing someone, but really the grief that happens for all of us when we bump up against things that were unexpected and things that are very painful. And so can we talk a little bit about the topic of grief and grief literacy, because I know that's something that's really pivotal to the work that you do.
Well, it's all interconnected, right? I mean, there's the little deaths and there's the big deaths. There's the little griefs and there's the big griefs. Grief literacy feels so essential and something that's really, kind of interwoven or intersects with all of these other different human experiences of illness and caregiving and, you know, just being a human and paying attention what's going on around us. And, I think unfortunately we have, one of my teachers, Francis Weller, who wrote a beautiful book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, right? He talks about the fact that culturally, we have been taught to really desire or long for places of the light and this ascendance versus descendance, and the things that really provide, that quick fix to feel better. And we see that role modeled and mimicked all over the place, everywhere we look. And so, we live in this interesting, both personal and collective territory where there's oftentimes not even a conversation happening about grief in the first place. It's kind of like we've hit the mute button or turned the volume button way down on grief. And there's this, kind of unspoken myth or sort of direction around it, which is just go and figure it out over there in your corner. And then when things are better, right? Because that's how I like to relate to you. When things are better, when you're lighter, when you're happier, then come back out and find us. And so we're left with this sensation of there's something wrong with the grief process itself. And so our grief literacy work is really about highlighting for people that there's really fairly simple things that we can just begin to pay attention to that allow us to feel the ability to walk towards challenging or, what we might perceive as darker spaces, right? The struggle, and say, I can be here with you in this.
How important do you think, as part of this conversation, that we are comfortable and familiar with our own dark places?
It's really important. And, when we always talk to people in the community or to our end-of-life doula students, right, to remind us that we do not have the capacity to show up and be alongside of and be in the rough stuff with others if we haven't exercised that really essential muscle within ourselves, right? That says, I desire to understand and know and be with the territory of my own emotional experiences, right? To really follow the pathway or the breadcrumbs that emerge out and go into other aspects of my life from previous past difficult experiences I've had, right? We've got to follow the breadcrumbs and see what else is there. How has this experience changed me? Where have I shut down? Where have I blossomed? And what does that mean in terms of being able to, be with others in their own experience? And not that we do it from a perspective of, I've been through it and let me tell you all the things.
Mm-hmm.
But I know this territory well, and I know those places of darkness. I know it's lonely. I know that, you have the sensation of the rest of the world's looking at you saying, we just wish this wasn't happening right now because it's uncomfortable for us. And to say, I have all the time in the world, right, to be here with what is for you. I think that's one of the greatest gifts when we can do our own work and use that as, the learning territory, the kind of the tumbling ground for ourselves. It gives us a different capacity to be there and to say, I don't desire you or myself to be anywhere but this. And I love James Hillman, the American psychiatrist, would oftentimes say, right, that most issues that we confront in life are not meant for resolution. They're meant for spaciousness.
Hmm.
And how do we create enough spaciousness within our heart, within our systems, within the relationships around us to say, what is, and I'm here for it, right? I'm here for this exploration and this potentially deep descent and this emergence of something else. But when we go instantly into it with the fixing mind or that perfectionism that's so well baked within all things within our culture, it's like we can't, like a loaf of bread, getting the yeast in there and needing to have it rise and do its things to turn into this delicious new thing. We don't have the cultural patience or the wherewithal to know what it looks like to allow for that spaciousness.
I had this visual pop up of meandering along a dark path with someone and not giving any indication that we're in a hurry to like, let's just hurry up and get to the destination, but just being, curious explorers together, and that the dark doesn't feel so scary when you're in it with someone else. And this morning I was bringing my trash cans up from the curb, and right where I have to put one of my garbage cans was this very fat, fuzzy black and orange caterpillar. And I squatted down to watch it for a little while, and I realized in that moment that there's these like two components to what it means to really slow down and be present, especially with nature, is that it's not enough to just simply like notice that it's there. I mean, that's great because then I didn't squash it with my garbage can, but to notice that it's there and then slow down enough to actually watch it. And I had this really a beautiful moment of seeing this caterpillar pause by this tiny little weed and start eating it, and getting to like watch it munch this little weed with its mouth and just feel this little moment of delight that I get to be in that space with this other creature that lives completely independent of me and is doing something worthwhile with these little weeds that I just don't want to be there. I want them to be pulled up or whatever. But it was the slowing down that is so often completely ignored or even ridiculed in a society that is obsessed with optimization and making the most of every moment and cramming your calendar full of the next best thing, and how do I be really strategic with my time and stuff. And so it's very rebellious to slow down with ourselves and with others.
Yeah, and we don't. It's almost like our nervous system and our DNA and everything is just so used to now, because of generations of it's just getting quicker and quicker, that we've lost that ability to sort of, it's the co-regulation that happens between us and another, right? But to be able to, we think we comfort by how we say something or what we say. And the truth is, we comfort by giving another the experience that I'm watching, right? I would rather be nowhere else but here. Like, to your point of meandering, almost that feeling of, do you want to give me the flashlight and I'll hold it for a bit, and I can kind of hold it there in front of your feet, and we'll take these steps together. If I think back to my biggest grief experiences, the lingering sensations or qualities or textures or memories of that are exactly that somebody took my flashlight and said, I can tell it's super scary and dark down here and you're not going to be here alone. Let me shine that for you, and that was what they said. That was the extent of it. Beyond that, it was how they felt. And knowing that, another thing grievers oftentimes experience is, I've heard this story. I know these things. You've told me how hard this is. I've heard the death of your husband 6 times. It's time to stop telling it. Right. And that's that other thing where we're hurried along. Like that story's been told enough. And to give grievers is, your storytelling is essential. And it's a way in which you begin to make meaning in a different way with what is right now. Right. It's a whole, it's kind of the cerebral, the somatic, the heart-based way of saying, what is truly my life right now? And that storytelling and that retelling is so essential. And I think that's another way where grievers are hurried along.
Yeah. The phrase that you never step in the same river twice. I don't think I've ever thought about that in the context of that you never actually tell the same story twice, because even though the verbiage might be the same, every time we touch a memory, we change it because of where we currently are. We're always looking through looking at the past through the lens of what we've learned since then, and even from the last time of retelling, and there's a different purpose in the telling of it again. And
Right.
so that's really helpful for me to hear, because I've had some times where like I almost get sick of hearing myself
Mm.
tell the same story again and again. And sometimes it's nice because you then are can recognize the places where you're stuck in the same patterns. And you finally are like, okay, I'm ready to move on from that way of thinking about things. But it's also um, like how we look at ourselves with compassion when we're feeling stuck, or when we're feeling like, why can't I just get over this?
Yeah.
That's I think that's a big part of grief too, is I've heard people say, like, when am I going to feel better? And
Mm-hmm.
there's the illusion of the of linear nature to grief, that has been unfortunately like exacerbated by a misapplication of the 5 stages of grief. And
Right.
so I'd be really curious to hear your take on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been sold all of these really outdated stories about the fact that, I will get beyond this,
Mm,
or, I will wake up someday and all of this will be over. Or
mm,
if I graduate from denial into, oh, I'm going to be in anger for a little bit, and then I hear all these grievers saying, I'm just doing it wrong and I wish I knew the right way to do this. And the truth is, there is no map. It really truly is. I think grief is one of the most interesting, almost like meditative practices that we
mm,
can be put into, where it is literally one foot in front of the next. This question of what is possible in this moment. And yes, maybe yesterday I woke up and I was able to get out of bed and I got my kids dressed and I put food on the table, and it was 3:30 p.m. before I got hit with a grief wave.
mm,
And then I wake up this morning and I can't even get out of bed, right? I'm doing this all wrong.
mm,
And it's this really it's such a composting experience of
mm,
being able to say all of these little pieces are truly part of this greater whole of something that's happening here. And I don't know what it is, but can those smaller parts of myself get out of the way enough just to say, I love you for what is happening right now. And that this is, we've heard this multiple times, right? But this is not something that you learn to get over, but that you learn to be with, to love, to integrate, to trust. That there's an emergence of something else happening in this chrysalis or this composting that really fundamentally feels like it's going backwards, and that it's not, that there's nothing happening.
mm,
It's a place of really profound self-trust, where you almost have to sometimes like plug your ears and say, yeah, I know what the rest of the world's saying about this experience, but I truly am the only one who can, tend to and love and be present to these spaces that really nobody else can see but me. And
mm,
it's in that, I think, that these really, and I don't mean to sugarcoat it and say, oh, grief's just this, beautiful, transformative, oh, the butterfly coming out of, this place of pause. And it is a really hard work. It is like labor in so many ways, right? We're laboring into life in a different way. Um, but I think we need to, the truth is, unfortunately, we need to be the protectors, the gatekeepers, the guardians of our grief process in a way, because the rest of
mm,
the world is going to say, don't do it that way, or hurry up, or I like it better when you're smiling. Right. And so I think that's the other essential part about the grief experience is how, who within our kind of social ecosystem do we have available to companion us in this. And oftentimes it's the people that most surprise us, the people that were
mm,
maybe going before whatever the grief experience entailed, are people that we knew less or felt less close to. um find those people who have that patience and that ability to not rush you along.
mm. On your website, you talked about services that complement hospice and palliative care. And so I would love to discuss, like, what are the gaps that you've seen in your work that have been needed to be filled by other more robust types of support. And you already gave us a really great statistic about 5% of the time being face to face with medical professionals. And so I'm really curious about what are some of the things that you feel like need to be shored up by other community supports or other, I mean, maybe even initiatives or programs that are created by medical professionals to be able to support people in a more holistic way when they're facing some type of diagnosis, or even not diagnosis, but just end of life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in a lot of ways the medical system is doing what the medical system is designed to do, right? And I don't know how much more bandwidth or interest or kind of co-creative collaboration is fundamentally possible there. I mean, we work as a nonprofit collaboratively with hospice, with palliative care professionals. And right, there is so much more. I guess where I'd start is saying there's so much more upstream that ideally is happening, right? That there is part of the work that we do is founded on something called the compassionate communities model of care, which says that, in times of crisis and medical emergency and death and dying and grief, that we all have a responsibility to take and to play for one another, right? That we have a much more robust sort of network or web of care around us, and that we cannot simply put the responsibility for care on the health system. And so within that, we need to sort of look at where are conversations around the fact that we are mortal beings, right? That we have preferences and, goals of care and ways of wanting to be treated and loved. If we were to get the terminal diagnosis tomorrow, what are those things and who are we sharing those things with? Right. And I think one of the biggest challenges is when we don't have those conversations, the emergency hits, and that is a very difficult window to start to feel into, to brainstorm, to communicate, and to move forward with people's preferences. And so that's one of the areas where I think within communities, a lot of our work is about opening up more dynamic, honest spaces for people to even begin talking about these things, right? The point of your podcast, normalizing conversations that really, in so many ways, kind of paradoxically, actually bring us more alive, right? We think, oh, it's dark, it's mortal, I don't want to talk about those things. The years I've been doing this work, when you open up spaces for people to feel into, if I were to be unconscious tomorrow and needed to be cared for, this is what I would like the space to feel like. This is who I want in the room. These are the prayers and the poems and the ways I want my body to be treated. People get into almost this like dreamy sort of kid-like state when we start talking about these things, right? So that's the big first step, is how do we just create possibilities for imagination and the creation of spaces to be able to talk about these things. Once the serious illness or the death or grief experience becomes more real, I think that's the thing, is people think, okay, well, my loved one will go on hospice and we'll have all of this, 24/7 care, and we'll have the professionals in the house, and, or I will go to, the hospice facility and be cared for there. And the reality is, the majority of hospice care is given at home. And a lot of people are either, living at home with an older spouse, right? Both of them being older adults and having to do really difficult caregiving. A lot of families needing to care for a loved one with a really complex medical diagnosis, and simply just do not have the education, the wherewithal, the hours, the kind of wider circles of community to come around them and support them in that. There's a lot of solo aging older adults. A lot of our work is done for individuals experiencing homelessness who've never had the opportunity to have a conversation around advanced care planning and say, if you were to die tomorrow, how do you want to be cared for? Or if you were unconscious in the hospital, what's important to know about you? So our work is really kind of, looking at in all those in between spaces, who is maybe receiving medical care, but it's again in that 5% window, and how are all of their other, kind of activities of daily living? Where are they living? What are conversations happening around their end of life care preferences? Do they know about, green burial or voluntary stopping eating and drinking or medical aid and diet? What are all of the options that are available to us? I think that's the thing. We're trying to kind of turn the light switch on in all these different rooms and say, look around and see what sort of things would be most in alignment with who you are as a person, how you've lived your life, and spend some time pondering this and share it with people so that you have, that you receive care that's more in alignment with who you are and who are the people that like start thinking about who are your circles of care now. Because when the thing happens, then you go, okay, activate versus trying to put that puzzle into place after the emergency.
What I appreciate so much about these types of conversations, and really the goal of so many of the conversations on this podcast, is that every conversation that we have about death is really a conversation about how we want to live. And so the exercises that you do with people that put them into that dreamy childlike state where they're thinking about how they want to be cared for, their physical environment, I hope that people will come away from that experience not just as an intellectual evaluation of the things that they want at the end, but as a way to start changing things now to create an environment that feels like that. Like if we're asking questions about like, who do you want to be there with you, or what type of do you want to be outside more, or what type of music, whatever. So like, can we start putting those pieces into our life right now that help us not, put off this comfort for later, but that we start just building our lives now in that way. I think that's such a fantastic application of these exercises in a way that goes beyond just this like cognitive appraisal of what I'm going to care about in the end.
Definitely. It's, I mean, I oftentimes say it's a practice or an exercise of getting current in our life right now. Right. And when people start thinking things like, who would you want to have there? Well, I'd really love my sister to be there, but we're currently not speaking. Or, my desire would be to have it look like this, but I haven't talked to that friend in years. So I don't know if we could do that on their property. Or, right. It's sort of like, listen, what are the things, right? If you were to sort of, shake the snow globe and have things resettle, and what comes to the surface, it's a practice, like you said, beyond just sort of that intellectual kind of prioritization of things. It's really feeling into what are the things I keep coming back to over and over again, right? What's the true mattering of life? And if we don't create opportunities to pause and to sort of do that scan and look and say, am I happy with how things are right now? Do I find true meaning in how things are situated in my life? Right. The five greatest regrets of the dying, right? So I wish I would have spent more time with my loved ones. I wish I would have worked less. I would have given more energy to the things that really, lit me up and brought me alive. Why is it that we actually really have this clear, consistent, these regrets of the dying? It's because we don't utilize these opportunities in the way that we could be, to say, yeah, this is a moment that I'm taking stock, and this is an opportunity to think about things right now, right before the thing happens, to wake me up in a different way.
Yeah, I wonder if sometimes we think the closer I am to death, the less afraid I will be to make these changes in my life, to tell the person that I want to reconcile with them or whatever. And it's such a funny way for us to think about that, because like, we are all so close to that finish line, sometimes much closer than we think we are. And so if we can somehow figure out how to manage the fear now of doing those things and press through it in service of the life that we really want to have, or in this case, the way that we really want to experience the last days or months or years of our lives, then hopefully we can like pull that into it now and not be so damned by fear, that we would be able to open those floodgates and just be like, okay, I'm just going to move forward even though the fear is still there,
Right.
because I can taste what's on the other side of that. And so I see that just being such like a beautiful outcome of so much of the work that you're doing, is that people then are making changes now in their lives when it's not like, game time. I'm on the last few minutes of this game now, and I got to try and make the winning touchdown. It's like, wow, let's develop some game plans now for how you want the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years to look.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask again about, so I wrote down, you briefly touched on the work of Francis Weller, which I absolutely love. His book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, is like, everybody needs to read that book.
Yeah.
And the difference between, or attitudes toward this perceived ascendance versus descendance. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think within grief, right? Or not even within grief, just culturally, we are given this persistent message, right? That if you have the quality of somebody that has levity, right? That you are doing things well, that you are productive, that there's this sense of being kind of pulled up by via these cultural values of being charismatic and funny and doing well and not having problems, right? We have this narrative that life should not be that way, as in bad things should not happen, or the norm, right? The norm is that we feel well or good or better than not. And so when the hard things happen, we kind of have this sense of things have gone wrong there. And that's that place of descendance, right? Of being pulled down in that state of having things feel out of control, right? And that I like to be in sort of the captain's seat, and to look up and to feel like I've got control of things around me and I can see all the things clearly, even though we can't see all the things clearly. But we value that sort of that posture. Descendant, that feeling of descending, is that feeling of I'm out of control. I can't influence things to a certain extent that I can bring back my child, that I can fix the fractured relationship, that all the things I crave for that have changed, that I have this, fundamental sort of power over. And those states are really scary to us, again, because we have this cultural narrative of the right thing is that you sit in the captain's seat. And so that descent, that going down and being taken down by something that we oftentimes didn't choose is a really disorienting state. And I love Francis Weller's work in that, because he reminds us that place of darkness, of not being able to see things very clearly, of feeling you look around and it's sort of like, where am I? What is going on here? Is a very soulful state, right? And that there's a maturation and a evolution and a getting closer to soul or spirit, or whatever words you want to put on it, in the darkness. And so, part of our role as humans is to work to cultivate a willingness, a tenderness, a capacity to sort of linger in those spaces and say, what is here? Teach me. I feel scared. What is this about? And not immediately say, I'm going to climb as fast as I can back up that ladder to get up into those right light-filled spaces.
Claw my way out.
Claw my way out as quickly as I can. Yeah.
So, okay, so you bought a one-way ticket to India. And then how long were you there, and what happened when you came back?
I bought a one-way ticket to India. I was 21. I had just turned 21. I was about 3 weeks into my 21st birthday. I stayed for 8 months. And when I came back to the United States, I felt very out of place. I felt like I had
Mm,
like peered into something. And been in a space. I mean, this was like back when there was I didn't have a cell phone. There was no internet. I could barely find a fax machine or a copy machine. I remember one day I had to go get a scan of my passport, and it was like there was nowhere to do that.
mm,
Um, and there was something that was just so, I felt so out of sorts there in this really liberating way that, it's almost like I crawled out of my skin and sort of was just like, well, I don't understand any of this. And something about that feels really healthy. So coming back, I found it was difficult to find spaces where I could talk about the experience in a lot of ways about, similar to grief, where I could talk about the experience and people would linger long enough to want to hear it.
mm,
It was so outside of most people's understandings of reality, or even what it meant to sit bedside with a woman dying of tuberculosis, and why would you do that, and are you okay, and that sounds so scary and dirty. The questions that people
mm,
asked and the ways in which I felt like I could connect with them was really alienating. It was a really difficult experience to return from and know, what is that integration between what
mm.
that was and what I went home to. Really difficult. And also I think really changed me in big ways. It kind of opened up this question of what do I need to do to continue to be a person that is trusted and that will sit alongside of whatever it is
Mm.
somebody else is, navigating before me.
So at what point did this become your work? Did you immediately then be like, well, I'm going to be like in the death doula space and helping helping bridge the gaps between
No.
the continuity of care? How did that
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah, I think that, the experience in India really opened my eyes to a lot, and just, seeing the fundamental differences of, after somebody would die, of, kind of putting the body on a ladder and parading it through the neighborhood so everybody could see that this person
Huh.
had died, and bringing them down, in Varanasi, bringing them down to the funeral, kind of pyres on the Ganges River, on the Ghats there, and seeing the body burn in daylight, and seeing just the rawness of the dying experience. I mean, I don't think I talked to anybody who didn't say, yeah, I've lost somebody really close to me. Death is a daily part of life here. So I was really intrigued by that, because thinking back to home life, it's like, how many dead bodies have I been with, right? How many people have I really experienced in this window? So I came back, and I started working in the experiential education field, which brought me to other parts of Asia, Central South America. And I kept kind of noticing this, wow, the way that my own culture relates to death and dying grief is not standard, right? There's so many
Hmm.
different kind of cultural, how we pull in ancestors, how we talk about the dead, how a body is tended to, what are the beliefs about what happens afterwards. And just the sheer rawness of seeing death in the streets and in different, kind of public spaces in a different way. So that kind of just woke me up to something that I've just held for years. Um, it was in 2010 that I was pregnant, went through a full term pregnancy, really healthy, um, 40 weeks and a day, and went into labor. And my son was born with a lot of complications. He had a true knot in the umbilical cord that hadn't shown up on ultrasounds or any other, medical screening. And so what felt like a very healthy and kind of straightforward birthing process quickly turned into an emergency of sorts, and we were whisked away to Children's Hospital. And it was the day after he died that we took him, or excuse me, that he was born, that we took him off of life support. And he died in the bed with me. And that experience for me really woke up. It turned conceptual, this curiosity about death and dying, to something that was really at the center of my world. And I experienced the thing that so many people do, which is a fracturing of my relationship. We grieved in such different ways. We couldn't re-find each other in that experience. I had dear friends that didn't know what to do and kind of said, yeah, reach out when you're ready. That onus, the onus or the responsibility we put on the griever to say, tell me what to do. I'll be here when you're ready. Which was hard, right? It was sort of like, I don't know what I need. I don't have the energy to reach out to you. And so it was almost like the whole world around me just started reconfiguring into something that was very different than what I anticipated. Most things kind of just fell away. My life fundamentally changed. And in that, I have a master's in urban planning. And in that experience, I think this question emerged of, how do we do this differently? How do we cultivate a different capacity within community so that those of us who go through and endure and live with these really difficult life experiences, which are not unique to any of us, we will all in one way or another experience this. What has to happen within community to give people a different level of competency and willingness and yes to say, I'm not turning away from this. I see this. I know this is part of me. I know this is part of my life through my love and my friendship with you. And I'll be here for this. So that's really what woke me up to say, what do I need to learn? And so I started in 2012, doing different end of life doula courses and death care courses, and slowly started kind of building this bag of tools that really wanted to be put somewhere. And so in 2018, met several amazing women here in Central Oregon who were also working in the death space in different ways. And we came together and founded the nonprofit together in late 2019. And the rest is kind of has taken us for a ride story moving forward.
What do you enjoy most about the work that you're currently doing?
I love the sense of wakefulness and remembrance that emerges in people when you give them the opportunity to learn, to be in an end of life doula course, or one of our continuing education courses, or one of our connection cafes, which are free public events where people can come together and talk about experiences of caregiving, of death and dying, of grief, to be in community with others that are one way or another going through something similar. I love seeing, the way that people feel about themselves and their role in life and their own grief experience, kind of shift in the sense of, there are people to be in this with, or I am a person that somebody can be in this with. People who do the end of life doula course, ending it and saying, I'm all of a sudden this different person walking around my community, right? That I'm watching and paying attention and available in a really different way. So I love the kind of tipping point effect that I see as more and more people are brought to this work, and feel a part of this work, and to feel, a lot of our work is based on bringing this death and grief literacy curriculum and training to rural communities across Oregon, places where there's service deserts and less hospice or palliative care. And the sense of people saying, yeah, I can do this. I can do this, for my neighbors or for my family. There's something being woven between all of us that's adding up to this greater sense of the compassionate community that really feels so relevant and needed and timely in this where we are alive right now today.
Mm. I feel like everyone, even if they have no intention of working in the death and dying space, would benefit from taking like a death doula course for sure, because so much of it is developing the skill to sit with the discomfort of the unknown and the messy and the smelly and the icky and the, all the things, to build up our tolerance for being in those spaces longer than people are typically comfortable with. So that's really,
Absolutely.
really lovely work. Um, we're coming up to the end of our time, but I will, of course, put in the episode notes where people can find all of your work and social media and the courses that you offer. Do you want to say just a brief thing about what a death doula is and how it's different from palliative or hospice care?
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like the term death doula or end of life doula is a little bit misleading in that, people hear that and they think, oh, this is a person who would come in, when a loved one gets a terminal diagnosis or is in the active dying phase. And we as end of life doulas really look at sort of the full spectrum of care and also step into that upstream space. So, helping people. Fundamentally, the role is non-medical in nature
Mhm.
and really helping in that psychosocial, relational, spiritual, if it's desired, logistical way. And so, working upstream, if people are interested in completing an advanced directive, doing more of that holistic advanced care planning, we created something, an end of life planning guidebook called Endnotes, that people can kind of go through these different phases of, if I were to not be able to communicate all of my desires and preferences and who I am as a person tomorrow, what are the things that I would want to say today? What are important things that people need to know? So a lot of that holistic advanced care planning work is done by end of life doulas. Um, we serve as advocates for people, right? Helping to kind of feel into those quality of life questions. What are the questions that need to be asked? What resources need to be pulled in? Did you know this exists in the community? This might be really
Hmm.
beneficial to your family. Um, a lot of that preparedness work in general. And then we do a lot of, bedside support, right? Helping with the vigil space, helping to plan, a celebration of life or a memorial, all of the, kind of the pillars that we sort of assume are core aspects of illness and the dying process. End of life doulas can help to step in and kind of like, make sure that there's stability
Hmm.
and integrity to those things so that, hopefully someone's, needs and desires and values are really prioritized and centered. Doulas can act as gatekeepers, right, during a dying process of saying, yeah, this is who can be in the space and this is who we're going to have stay out of it. And we will be the communicator, the, kind of the connective tissue through all of this thing. And really, ideally, end of life doulas are empowering families and friends and the community to really get involved in the most appropriate way possible for each scenario, that we're not kind of usurping or taking those roles, but really, acting as conduits or pulling people in so that people feel really much more capable and comfortable being a part of, the dying process. So we work really collaboratively with hospice. We'll have referrals from hospice or palliative care professionals saying, this individual is dying at home. They're a solo aging older adult and they could just use a lot more support in terms of, making phone calls to their daughter, talking about some of these existential fears,
Yeah.
writing a letter to grandchildren, figuring out like what's going to happen after they die. They want to stay at home for a day or so. Is this possible? So, kind of all of the different logistical and psychosocial needs that really surround a dying process is where a doula can step in and support.
Thank you for the clarification and the explanation of what a doula does. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your beautiful experiences and your wisdom about your work and your life experiences with us so that we can all sit in the dark spaces a little bit longer.